2025 is going to be a huge year for the authorization and identity space. I'm Alex Olivier. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer here at Cerbos. And today we're going to look at what are the trends we're going to see appearing over the coming year and really where are the focuses across our clients, users, business, and just conversations over the last 12 months at various events, exhibitions, trade shows, and conferences. To start off with, this continuation of the trend of authorizations growing in mindshare. We've spent the last 3, 4, 5 years really educating and getting up to speed as identity professionals around what authorization is and how it fits inside of your business and how it meets your business requirements. Authentication now is a relatively solved problem, though very much in quote marks, and authorization is the next layer. So once someone is identified and authenticated inside of your system, what can they actually do inside of your application architecture and on side of your premise systems? So we're going to see this evolution and requirements coming in and engaging with those identity professionals from a security standpoint, from a practitioner standpoint, from an architecture standpoint, around how authorization is really going to come in and become a foundation stone inside of your architecture track. It was the number one talking point at all the events we were at over the last year, from 30 plus conferences, speaking, doing podcasts, going to industry events, as well as things like the Internet Identity Workshop. Big trend this year around authorization. This year is also going to lead us down the route of standardization of authorization. So just over a year ago now, the OpenID working group called AuthZen was founded, of which Cerbos is a key contributor of, which is all around standardizing how a policy decision point and how authorization is implemented inside of your application. The first version of that spec was released last year. We are now in a scenario where Cerbos, along with other vendors, can all work together and you can plug in an authorization solution inside of your application without necessarily being tied to any particular vendor's API or interface. And that's only going to go accelerate over this year as we start supporting more use cases beyond the simple check call around adding authorization and externalized authorization into your application. So when you're designing a system, standards are obviously a big part, but really the first discussion that happens a lot of the time is, do you buy or do you build a solution for authorization inside of your system? I think it's safe to say now we're in a world where businesses are realizing and practitioners are realizing that you could spend 6, 12 months, 18 months or more building a whole authorization layer for your application, or go and pick one of the solutions that's out there to meet your requirements. And a lot of the time these solutions have an open source offering. So the core of Cerbos is open source, as well as many other solutions out there. And we're starting to see that authorization is heading in a similar direction for companies when it comes to how their authentication layers were implemented. So originally those would have been built in-house, but now through a myriad of vendors out there, there are great drop-in solutions to handle the authentication, the identity, the directory part of the system, and authorization is only going to follow that trend over the coming year. So when it comes to actually defining your policy and defining your authorization logic, up till now we've seen various ways of defining policy, be it defining the rules or defining the relationships between entities inside of your system. You may have to go and learn some esoteric language or DSL to actually define your authorization rules. But what we're going to see over this year really is a simplification of managing policy changes. And this isn't driven just because we wanted to build something nice. We're actually seeing now authorization management and the rules being taken off the workload of developers and actually put in the hands of people that own that authorization logic inside of a business. Be it a product manager, be it a security architect, be it a auditor, be it a CISO, be it a support team. You name it, we've seen authorization rules and requirements being managed by various different parts of businesses in a variety of industries. So this evolution of this year, I imagine we're going to see a trend across vendors of simplifying that whole process to allow those non-developers and even now external auditors or regulators to be able to actually inspect and understand what is going on inside a policy, inside of a system, without having to go and learn code or having to go and learn some very specific language. And this really flows into a more user-friendly authorization workflow. So enabling those business users to actually go in and make policy changes or approve policy changes through third-party platforms that really are tailored to support this inside of a business, and making sure that those that need to go and manage policy inside of a business can, regardless of their technology skills or familiarity with how a system is architected, and really enabling more of the businesses. So we've gone through the hype of 2024 of AI. So now we are in 2025, and it's safe to say that AI is very much here to stay. And so the obvious question is, how can these new technologies, LLMs, etc., support me and help me to reach my business goals when it comes to authorization? And I have a very clear view of where it makes sense to use these AI technologies and where you shouldn't. And really the first place where it makes most sense is to really help you take your business requirements and convert it into a policy. So we're seeing now LLMs moving to a world where 76% of engineers, as surveyed last year by Stack Overflow, have said they're using AI-assisted technologies for their software development. I think that trend is only going to continue into this year, and also enabling other use cases, not just helping you write application code, but helping you take those business requirements, convert them into whatever policy format or whatever descriptor format that you need for an authorization layer. LLMs are a great tool for this because they can really take the business understanding and convert it into some very defined, structured format. And OpenAI and Claude and Sonnet and all these other models out there are now actually getting very good at writing policy, be it Cerbos or some other solutions. And I think we're going to see this accelerate over the year. The other place where you need to really think about authorization as you start rolling out and using these new AI systems inside of your business is when you're building applications that are leveraging things like RAG architectures inside of your company. How do you actually go and productionize these? 2024 was a great year of businesses experimenting and prototyping and testing and kicking the wheels of how these kind of systems and architectures can help them reach their business goals. But now it's time to take these testbed experiments and actually productionize them. And one of the key areas you really need to think about and design for when productionizing these RAG architectures is how you do security. Fundamentally, a RAG system is storing your entire business knowledge inside of a vector store and then putting some sort of conversational interface on top of that. And that effectively is like a backdoor inside of your system and to entire your data sets. So we've done all this great work to make sure our applications and our internal tools have proper permissions and controls around it. But now those can essentially be sidestepped just by asking through a chatbot a question of your data set stored that's been ingested into a vector store somewhere. So taking an authorization solution and putting that in front of your RAG architecture to ensure that your proper application and business requirements and permissions are met and enforced even at the retrieval stage inside of your RAG systems is going to be a key one to enable you to actually productionize these great new ways of working, but still maintain that control and security around them and use the exact same source of truth for who can do what inside of your architecture, which is that policy that is version tested, audited, and managed, and then used both in your legacy kind of applications, but also inside of your new LLM-enabled RAG-style architectures. So it's all great having all these systems connected up and using an externalized authorization solution to take a policy-based approach for authorizing who can do what inside your application. And one of the side benefits of that approach is you get this nice audit log. Every single decision that a policy decision point makes can be captured, so you know exactly at this time this user tried to do this action on this particular resource and was either allowed or denied by this particular policy. This is great, but now do this at scale. You're going to have tens, hundreds, thousands, millions of these records coming out of your authorization layer. And how do you get something useful from it? Well, again, we can turn to what's going on inside of these new AI models, doing things like log analysis, anomaly detection, really understanding behavior, being able to decipher from the audit logs and make recommendations around particular roles or attributes that maybe are over underutilized, over permissive even, and really give you an action point and an action plan as security professionals to go and lock down and control and really make sure your authorization policies are doing as they should. And we can leverage all this great tooling to understand massive amounts of data to get these insights and make your overall security posture much safer, cleaner, and ultimately help you sleep better at night. The depth and specificity of authorization policy is something we've seen evolving rapidly over the last year. So fine-grained authorization now has become a must-have. We're seeing businesses that are evolving and expanding and merging with companies and buying out companies and rolling out to new geos, etc. And that every time you go into a new part of the world, you're going to have further geo compliance regulatory needs that you need to meet. Geopolitics is one thing, but also data locality is another that you need to go and concern and worry and think about. So as all these frameworks and regulations evolve and come through the courts in different parts of the world, you need to be able to adapt and make sure your authorization policies that you put in place can be locked down and specified enough and specific enough to meet those new requirements that are going to land on you as businesses, to ensure that the relevant parts and relevant people inside of your company can access what they need to, and nothing else and nothing more beyond that. Multinationals will need software that can handle these complex organizational structures. Making sure your policy can support department, geographical, team, tenant-specific type boundaries within inside of your application. And then if you're building software that you then sell or are a vendor yourself to other companies, how can you make sure that your users on side of your platform and their tenant can have their own set of authorization policies and rules to really allow you to tailor and mirror the requirements that those companies have inside of your system without having to build something bespoke every single time. So these more granular permissions, fine-grained checks, and the ability to do this per tenant customization, a growing area of demand we're seeing right now. And I feel this is only going to accelerate throughout the year. So to meet that more fine-grained permission check and finer-grained access controls, the move to attribute-based access control is really upon us. We've spoken a lot in previous years about making sure you have your roles and make sure to have roles explosions, making sure that you can actually get quite specific with your permissions, and attribute-based access controls is one of the ways that you can achieve this. So increasing product complexity and rules and setups and requirements inside of your application. To meet these requirements, we're going to enable you to actually go and use an attribute-based approach where you're permissioning access and permissioning enabling actions to particular resources based not just on what role someone has, but individual attributes at that moment in time that user has. So it could be department, team, role, it could be quotas, it could be a risk score, it could be a break glass score, it could be a clearance approval date, these kind of attributes, which are all context about who the user is, to make those much more finer grained checks inside of your system. And this is only going to accelerate throughout the years as the specificity of what your access is only going to have to increase or get more detailed to ensure that you're meeting kind of those regulatory requirements. And then finally, the big one, which is non-human identities and how delegated access works inside of your system. This is a trend that really was a big focus at the Internet Identity Workshop last year, which I attended, which is about as we start enabling more systems, and particularly AI and agentic systems out there, to start doing actions on your behalf, or just having simply workloads across your system. How can you make sure workloads or agents or cron jobs on an API ultimately are behaving in the way that they should and controlled in the way they should? So how do you go about issuing identities to services? How do you go about issuing identities to agents? How do you go about managing those identities? What's the life cycle of those identities? But the key thing once is you have the identity, how do you then authorize around it? You can just treat it like any other user, but in the case where someone has instructed a model or an AI agent to go and do something on their behalf, you now need to worry about delegated chains, delegation chain, delegation access. Can this agent or can this identity acting on behalf of this user do this particular action? Should that action be granted because this agent has access, or the identity of the user that's instructed the agent has access, or the moment in time that agent had access? Do you need to attenuate that access controls? There's a lot of open-ended questions here, and there's some great work going on across the numerous working groups, across lots of the standing committees to really be able to rationalize what these flows should be, how identity delegation works, how permission delegation works, how you manage the evolution and life cycle of these non-human identities. And this is only going to accelerate through the year as more businesses start bringing on more agentic workflows, bringing on more autonomous systems. This is a problem that needs to be solved. Having a policy engine in there is going to be a key requirement to make sure that you can sanely manage these human identities and the delegated access that kind of comes with them. So just to close it off, I think this year is really going to be the big shift towards a more secure, flexible and scalable authorization approach. We're moving away from role explosions, we're moving away from basic access controls to much more fine-grained model of both human and non-human and agentic workflows inside of your software, inside of your architectures, and making sure that you have a sane approach to managing the evolution of the authorization inside of your products and architectures is going to be a key one of those to provide you that audit trail of what's going on, so you can be certain that your authorization and your application security is doing as it should, and also be notified when things aren't behaving as they should. So if you'd like to learn more or want a bit of guidance on how you can go about implementing and making sure you are staying ahead of these trends for the year, please get in touch with Cerbos.dev. You can also find the links in the description of this video. Thank you very much. Speak soon.